very much. I am Dr. Bhaskar Bora, or to be more precise, a retired doctor. I became disabled uh, on 17th of July 2019, where I had a spinal cord injury following an operation that went wrong. And what was meant to be a one night stay in the hospital turned out to be about 7 months, and subsequently, within a month, I also was diagnosed with cancer of the thyroid. So while at the peak of my career, I had to give up medicine, and then after going through all the phases of depression and then despair and all of that, I managed to finally come out, and now I am a disability campaigner, cancer advocate, and I am also an author. And my book, got two books, one with Mary, one of mine called The Second Chance of Life, which by grace has become a bestseller in 27 different countries. So that's who I am, and today we're going to talk a bit about disability itself and the impact of masculinity, or what we think as masculinity, and the articulation itself with this, in terms of disability and how it affects us. So I'll hand over to Mary, who is a very close friend, and we were actually classmates. She's now an associate professor in India, and I live in London. I've been here for the last 20 years. Please.
Thank you. So Bhaskar is the subject and the object of the paper. So this is more of a discussion perhaps. I'd like to begin with a quotation that I take from his book, his memoir, The Second Chance in Life. And there he has said, "I'm used to being in control. I like being in control. Don't we all?" Right? And bodies are subjected to cultural structures directed towards performance with an intention to conform to the socially and culturally approved norm of usefulness and desirability. To that end, bodies that are considered normal manifestation in the in certain ableist functionality, we find bodies that are framed within the collective conformist worldview, while they act as signifiers upon which structures of power, culture, knowledge, and signification are inscribed. In such context, bodies are also gendered entities that perform within their socio-culturally established attributes of masculine or feminine. The normative interpretation of a masculine body leads one to look at it as a site of power, control, and the ability to perform, which plays a crucial role in our interpretations of the world, our assumptions of social identities, and our acquisition of knowledge. Within that, such normative discourse of body and its functionality, the recognition of a body as disabled is perhaps more about the deviance from the conformed social and cultural interpretations of the able body than the subject's recognition of disability. It reflects the dividing practices of the society and its culture marked upon the subject. Within the normative heterosexual, cultural, and social practices, the masculine body is structured as the able body, one that is capable of performing the repetitive gendered acts by virtue of its ability, remaining consistent to the conformed ideological notion of maleness. This structured body is subject to social practices. A deviation from the conformed assumptions of masculinity may put the body in question, foregrounding its inability, disability that would seemingly relegate the body to a marginal space. Judith Butler's theorization of performance anticipates the subject as already constituted within the fundamental assumptions about ideology, identity, and subjectivity. So Bhaskar being my friend, and I having that access to his life before this disability, and then after that, so there was this constant, and after the book that came out, there was this constant discussion between us regarding how, and the difficult moments that he had to shift himself from this whole ableist idea of masculine performance to this now that disabled or unable to perform. That was constantly there, and I could guess it from the discussions that we had. So this is actually the outcome of those discussions in this attempt now. While mapping the contours of the masculine self in relation to its performances in everyday lived reality, it would be rather evident that these performances, the family man, the son, the father, the husband, the brother, requires the self to be in position of control, embedded into the socio-cultural ethos of a certain lived condition. It is commonly seen that the masculine is an absolute form. The female counterpart is comprehended in relation to this absolute masculine order. So now what happened is that I'd like to talk about, in between our discussions, his wife Mili is also a working woman, and then he sits back behind, is at home, he does his work from home, and then when I would talk to him, he would say, I am the wife now, you see. So those ideas were also a part of this, this idea coming up. Therefore, any engagement with the disabled body would perhaps require a departure from the medical approach, whereby disability is understood as a medical condition requiring a certain form of treatment. The emerging field of disability studies seem to offer a more grounded approach, within which disability is not considered merely as a condition pertaining to the corporeality of the body, but as an identity conditioned by the social meanings, symbols and stigmas enforced systems of oppression and exclusion, leading to an understanding how disability may come to represent a marginal socio-cultural identity rather than being confined within the purview of the corporeal body. Considering the disabled identity as an oppressed social location, then one may perhaps contend that such locations create identities and perspectives, embodiments and feelings, histories and experiences that stand outside of and offer valuable knowledge about the powerful ideologies that seem to enclose us. So considering the overarching role played by ideology in structuring and conditioning our lived experiences, it then becomes rather pertinent that one engages with the understanding of ability as an ideological construct, as an absolute category against which any form of deviation comes to be recognized as a disability. Whereas it is of prime significance to recognize that disability is more often understood in terms of the body's inability to perform in its essentialist sense. An able-bodied individual might be lesser in terms of performance as against an apparently disabled individual. That is what I keep telling him, because there are so many able-bodied people who, in terms of performance, or if you see in them in terms of the quality of their existence that they are contributing towards life in general, that might be much lesser than what he has been trying to do. So this whole idea of disability needs to be rethought and reworked upon, I suppose. We have numerous instances of such lives who have risen above their apparent disability, just the paper previously just read now. Stephen Hawking of our times, for instance, to contribute towards human life and society in an unparalleled manner. This leads one to rethink the disability paradigm once again, which would encompass the broader picture. However, it must be reiterated that the stronghold of ideology in marking out disabled identity engenders complex perspectives on the notion of human ability, which substantially affects the disabled, leading to a stark realization of the absences in terms of structuralist understanding of performance. The embodied understanding of disability would direct one to have a comprehension of how the body adapts to the apparent absences while utilizing the body's variability, thereby transcending immanence in general. So understanding the body as a variable entity then would lead one to comprehend of how the apparent absences in terms of the essentialist approach to ability appear compensated or substituted by a strong transcending of the same. The disabled body adapts itself to performance of a different order. Contrary to the assumption that disability is a negative identity, one comes across numerous occasions where the disabled have come to articulate a positive identity through an adaptation to the body's variability while transcending the dominant ideological paradigms of ability. It is important to understand that disability may not always be by birth. It might be contingent on different medical or other conditions that an individual experiences in one's own life. In cases where able-bodied bodies had experienced impairment for medical reasons or otherwise, the response towards the impairment provides an intersection to a general approach to disability. It is the before and after experiences in performance that constitute the totality of experience in such subjects. The articulation of disabled experiences would perhaps represent a departure from the given approach. A subject whose performances were in conformity with the dominant practices of socio-cultural patterns sees himself, herself in a position of the marginal as the body's corporeality is now transformed. This leads to an engendering of a new sense of subjectivity, a new disabled identity, in which memory of the earlier physical existence plays a significant role. The trajectory of the able body, now disrupted by disability, while responding to the changed reality, nevertheless continues to draw its references from the practices of ableism. The social and cultural construction of the masculine embedded in the nurturing of the ego appears to share and interface with the performance practices that nurture the masculine to emerge as an absolute category in the human species. Masculine thus takes on the productive aspect of gender while engaging in the repetition of acts considered as signifiers that establish the subject as masculine in a given social and cultural context, in the context of the able-bodied worldview. Signifiers that constitute the discourse of body rely upon the dominant ideology of ableism, identifying the subject in relation to certain conformed performances. Aligning with Foucauldian theory, Butler examines the interventions of power and discourse in production of a subject that finds mention in her observation in an interview published in Radical Philosophy, where she states, I quote, "Power works in part through this discourse, and it works in part to produce and destabilize subjects. How discourse might be said to produce a subject, it's clear that one's already talking about a certain figure or trope of production. It is at this point that it is useful to turn to the notion of performativity, the performative speech acts in particular. This is the moment in which discourse becomes productive." So the notion of the masculine and the feminine constituted in the conformist discursive practices is very much responsible in giving the self its own idea of itself. And then there is a deviation. Whenever there is a deviation, there is already this benchmark from where you measure yourself, and you continue to do so. In case of our friend, it's a kind of a before and after, and there is a continuous, coming back and forth from that benchmark. If one goes by the discursive connotations of performance associated with the production of the masculine body in an ableist worldview, disabled bodies will then very likely embody absences, certain lack that would lead to its ghettoization into the marginal spaces. So this paper, as I've already said, would make an effort to engage with the experience of disability encountered by the presenter. The first in experience to arrive at an understanding of how, the whole idea of Butler's idea of performance, the stereotyping of the male and the female, these are all, very variable, that this cannot be understood in terms of certain fixed stereotype notions, that the body continues to respond to the, the outside world, the existential situations within which it is posited. And in case of Bhaskar, we find that there has been a transformation from his initial phase of, going down and depression, and then coming up, out of it. So the self that was at one point of time a performer, as in those stereotypical roles, the normative roles of being a father, and he still continues to be a father, of course in a different manner, as a man who is, in control, as his book says. He now has a different form of, articulating himself, and now that he is into creative domain, it is seen that the whole idea of masculine performance, which he was practicing or he was a part of prior to his disability, has now transformed into a further refined, I would say, and a much more, sort of evolved manner of life through his creative, output. So he encountered the greatest trauma of his life, with disability becoming a part of his lived experience, and then life seemed to be beyond his control. And it is worth mentioning that the ableist notion of masculinity within which Dr. Bora was situated was now transformed, and it is interesting to observe how that transformation, the very notion of the masculine now, has also undergone a change. The way in which he adapted to his ability reflects the body's variability. In this instance, it is seen how he, after his post-retirement from an extremely busy and successful career, paved the way for his creative growth. The articulation of the masculine self that was manifest through the gender performances was now articulated through his creative faculty. However, the articulation of self remains at the root of his writing. It is through his writing that we come to see his own understanding of his changed circumstances. There is an acceptance of the trauma and the need to move forward in life, as he himself writes. I will quote from his book. It's in page 137. Acceptance is the first step in any emotional fight back, and I was soon able to accept my life-changing events and limitations. I came to understand that there are certain things that cannot be changed and there are things that can. It is better to accept the things that cannot be changed and learn to adapt to them. This way, you can focus your energies on changing what can be changed in order to make the most out of the demanding situation. In these lines, I find Bhaskar still the man who wishes to be in control, now in control of his disability and trying to, articulate himself in a much more perhaps refined and evolved manner. And that is how his whole idea of, this disability and masculinity, they are overlapped, and somewhere the masculinity discourse is left far behind, because his writings are now more of a humanist zeal, and he talks about disability and the necessity of empathy in this world to come out and have a dignified life. And I would wish Bhaskar to continue.
Thank you. Thank you. So, well, Dr. Mary has said it all really. As we're talking, we all do like to be in control. Some admit it, some deny it. And it is easy to be in control when things are going well. But it is more important to be in control when things are going wrong. That is where we need to be ourselves. An eagle, if you know, when a storm comes, an eagle tends to fly at a higher altitude to escape the turbulence, whereas a dormouse tends to hide in a corner until the storm passes away. So it is up to us to decide whether we want to be the eagle or we want to be the dormouse. And the rest is about how we adapt ourselves to the things, as Marian just mentioned. There are certain things in this world that we can change or influence, and there are certain things which we can't. And it is because our energies are finite, so it's important to be able to focus our energies on those things where we can have the influence or where we can change it to have an outcome. Otherwise, if we just moan about things, what's gone wrong and not, then we really can't make any positive difference to ourselves or to others. And it's not something that I have evolved within one day. It's now, today is actually the 4th anniversary of the operation that went wrong. And it was very difficult because, again, not only the gender and societal norms and everything, it's also difficult for people to understand the disability of a person who is born with a disability or somebody who was deemed as normal and successful to suddenly become disabled and to lose everything overnight. And that's what happened with me. So it took me a long time to come to terms with it. And one of the instances which made me think that I need to take the bull by the horns was the day when I kind of went to my bed when I was in the bed and in the hospital, at Wellington Hospital in London, and I just could not reach the buzzer on time, and my legs won't move, and I couldn't call the nurse, and I was at my bed, and I was trying my best not to not to disturb anyone, because the nurse came in eventually, and she did her best in trying to change the bed sheet, and she stripped me and everything. But it was humiliating, not just because I was stripped naked by somebody I didn't know, but also for the fact that I have myself done that as a doctor to other patients without realizing what had gone in their mind when I was doing that as a part of my training. So that was the time when I kind of realized that now I can't let me be a vegetable and let everything get on top of me. There was another incident when I was going on a clinic and going to a clinic, and I was in the car, and I just felt like if only my car would crash to the next one and I could have the easy way out, because I am still taking 16 to 20 tablets a day, every day, to get rid of this neuropathic pain. But then again, just at the moment, I probably would have done it actually, but just at that moment, I had a flashing image of my younger daughter, who was only 9 at that time. You see, but I couldn't just let them down. And that was, I think, again, maybe the masculine thing in me, and the fact that, I have been, when I've been called a cripple by many, some jovially, some more seriously, just because they don't realize the impact of it. And I've also been told, I mean, what are you doing? Your wife's earning and you're just sitting at home. So those sort of things wherein comes the factor of empathy, people not understanding what somebody is going through. So there have been many instances where I have felt that, yeah, what's the point of it all? But finally, I think over a period of time, I won't say spiritual, but probably an emotional evolution took place. And it almost felt like I had to carry the baton for people who have been going through this but still haven't found their voice yet. And that's how I started putting things on social media. And then I would get an overwhelming response from people. And then that's how it translated into a book. I never thought that I would be able to write a book, and the book became a bestseller. And then I got invited to various platforms to talk as a motivational speaker and talk about disability. So it all became a part of the process. But I think what I want to say here in terms of the masculinity itself is that there are stereotypical roles which are being conformed by the societal norms, that this is what a man needs to do, this is what a woman needs to do. And some of it is right, because the man used to be the hunter and the food gatherer, and the woman used to look after the family. But things have moved on since. The world has moved on since. So such type of stereotypes are now need to get rid of. Because I think if you think of the family as a car can only have one driver at a time. So you have to know when you are in the position to drive, or when you know that you are not in that position anymore, so you have to hand it over to somebody else. And I think maybe because of my experiences as a doctor and seeing other people suffer, or whatever reason, I understood that this was a time when I need to hand over the driving seat to my wife, and me take over the supporting role. And that's what I have been trying to do. I have been ridiculed by many, but at the same time, lots have come up and said that yes, I am still playing a part, I am still doing a job, I'm still playing a vital role in this family. And that's what I would urge you all to think. Not all disabilities are seen, as we have discussed before. And in fact, the people with unseen disabilities face a much bigger battle, because they don't have the crutches or the blue badge to show, but they are still suffering as much. So what we need in this world is not your sympathy. People like me, we don't need your pity, we don't need your sympathy, we don't need your money. What we need is empathy and compassion. We need you to understand that I am also a person with some different abilities to you, to what you have. So and whether it's masculine, whether it is feminine, it is humanity which is most important, not the masculinity and the femininity. And what I just need for you to understand, for example, if you want to know how I perform as a person with limited mobility, because I can only walk up to 30 yards, so the rest I need a wheelchair. Then you try and strap yourself to a wheelchair for a day and walk around and say, and see how you behave. If you want to understand someone with visual impairment, blindfold yourself, and then just go around and try and do your work. You will know what it means. That is what empathy is. I've seen so many physiotherapists and occupational therapists who haven't broken a bone in their life, but they come and tell me what to do. That's not the way it works. So that's what we have tried. Say, Mary is a literary expert. I'm not a literature doctor, so I am just trying to share my experiences. And I would, by virtue of this discussion presentation, I would encourage you all to be compassionate, be empathizing, to understand about not just disability, but about the variabilities in the body that we all possess, and not just the physical aspect of it. Because masculinity and femininity and everything, it goes beyond the physicality and the sexuality. It is a state of the mind that needs to evolve with time, with circumstances. And if we can do that, we can all be better human beings. And I would want to end it all, and from my side, before handing back to Mary, is to say that we cannot control what the universe throws at us, but how we react to those curveballs define who we are. Thank you.
Thank you.